screen and I turn my microphone off.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to part 2 of our virtual tour down the Thames. I'm Stuart Varnamakin, and I'd like to welcome back all of those who joined us in part 1, and welcome to new travellers in part 2. What we are doing in this virtual tour of part of London is to enjoy some of the wonderful sights to be found along the central part of London and the River Thames, which has always been a very important part of life in London and life in the whole of Britain. And what we will do is we will travel by boat, we will travel by train, we'll do some walking thanks to Google Maps with the invaluable assistance of Hiroyuki Eguchi, who is at the moment with us, but unseen. And I'll also be using some of my own collection of postage stamps and engravings and books and so on to provide some extra information and also some realia and some photos I've taken myself in London. So I hope you enjoy it all. And I've also included some quiz questions you'll see on page 2. This is just for fun. Please don't get too serious about them. And I hope I'll give you the answers as we go along. So what we should do, I think, to start with, is just have a look at some old maps and explain just exactly where we are. So, just a minute, sorry, I just have to get this full screen.
I can cut it.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, Hiro, I'm not getting this full screen.
Next button on the right, down there.
Yes, it just says normal view, but nothing happens. Perhaps if I...
normal view, the left of the normal view. I think that
is that okay?
Okay.
Good. Sorry about that. So here we go. And this is the wonderful picture, which is actually included in the textbook, which I hope you've received. And this is a 16th century manuscript, actually in the British Library. And you can see there on the right, we have the wonderful White Tower from the Tower of London we'll be visiting later. And right in the distance, the far background, we can see London Bridge, which we'll also be looking at in a few minutes. And this shows the great importance of the river, boats on the river, and all the activities that went on around the river. This is a very lovely map from 1950, Wardlock Guide to London. And this is the section of the river we're looking at first today. On the top left corner, that is actually where London Bridge is. And you can just see the Tower of London, which is there, and Tower Bridge, which is right there. And then the river continues right down here. Now, this is 70 years ago, and you'll notice lots of blue here And over here, and those areas are all docks. This was the Port of London, very important dock area. Since 1950, when this map was produced, it's completely changed. The docks have moved away completely, and we'll look at some of the modern developments of the dock areas later. And here's a rather simpler map of the section we're doing today. So top left, we can see Westminster, where we started in part 1, and then we travelled, if you remember, along the Thames, going downstream, past Waterloo, and then Cannon Street there, and the Globe Theatre, etc. And you eventually come to London Bridge, and there's Tower Pier there. And then we'll be continuing right the way down today, down here, down this big U loop. And there's Canary Wharf here, we'll be visiting. And then the foot tunnel here to Greenwich and Cutty Sark, and this whole area here towards the end of today's tour. So now let's go back, and I will switch off my screen for a while, and let's go back to our Google trip. And we're going to start with something which is not very old at all. We're going to look at some of the new millennium buildings, which have only been erected in recent years. And the first of them is right by London Bridge and the Borough Market we visited last time. And this is called the Shard. Very interesting name. And it's called the Shard because it looks like a massive shard of glass shooting up into the sky. This has become a new kind of icon of London, if you like. There it is. It's 95 stories, 309 meters, and 11,000 panes of glass. Very impressive building. It has actually 2 levels of observation deck, a bit like Skytree. One's called the view from the Shard, and part of that is actually open air, and you get a wonderful view looking down. There is Tower Bridge, right in the middle of the river there, from the Shard. The Shard is, of course, a mixed use building. There are many offices there. The Shangri-La Hotel is in the building. And it was actually designed by an Italian architect who was inspired by 2 things, actually. One was the wonderful spires, the towering spires of the churches, which he saw in Canaletto's painting of London, and also by the towering masts of all the sailing ships which used to come into this part of the Port of London. So the spires, of course, of churches were designed to go shooting up towards heaven. That was the idea. And so he decided this was very suitable kind of design for London, certainly very revolutionary. And well worth a visit. There are some nice restaurants and everything inside there. So that was in 2012. And now let's go back just a few years across the river. We're going to go now to the north side of the river, very briefly, to the City of London, a huge financial area, which has always been a very independent district of London, run by the financiers and the business people. And there's an interesting building which has the nickname, the Gherkin. And you'll probably see why in a minute. Here it is. It's actually at 30 St. Mary Axe Street is the address, but it's nicknamed the Gherkin. And the reason is it looks like this, like a gherkin. Rather similar to the building in Shinjuku, actually. This is 180 meters, and it was actually the site of an IRA bombing in 1992. So the previous building was changed and a completely new building put up. And it calls itself the most civilized skyscraper in the world. And here we have a lovely view from way up in the Gherkin. Great 360-degree view looking across London. And if we look in that direction, we come across another very interesting and very famous building, which has the nickname of the cheese grater. And let's have a look at that. The cheese grater was finished in 2014 and is just down the road. And it's actually called the Leadenhall building, really, but everyone calls it the cheese grater. This is also in the city. This is about 225 meters, and there you see, just like a cheese grater. And I hear that a second cheese grater is being planned right now, so we look forward to that. Get some tremendous views of London again from there. It's another mixed office building, but you can go inside, and I recommend the websites of these buildings, because the cheese grater in particular, if you go on their website, you can get a nice video taken from up above, a nice bird's eye view, and highly recommended to go and see some of these interesting buildings which have all been built in the 21st century and are still being built today. So we've started at what's going on in the recent years. Now let's go back to a little bit of history, to one of the most famous bridges in the world, which is, of course, London Bridge. London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down, my fair lady. Well, there's a tremendous history of London Bridge, which London Bridge today is not a particularly exciting place to visit in itself, but we should just have a little bit of the history. Here it is. This is the London Bridge as it is today, but it's not the first. There have been lots of London bridges over the years, and ever since the Romans, in fact, 2,000 years ago, and probably before that, this was the one place where people could cross the River Thames. This is why it's so important. Now, here we have a very famous Vischer engraving of London, and this is particularly interesting because we can see, not in the distance, we can see lots of spires that inspired the Shard. In the foreground, that tower is Southwark Cathedral, which we visited last time. And there in the middle is the incredible old London Bridge. It was a stone bridge. It was first completed in 1209, so 800 years ago, and it was, altered many times over the years. It became the wonder of Europe, and you can see there were on top of the bridge there were towering houses, several stories high. There were inns, there were restaurants, there were shops, and there, right at the end, I don't know whether you can see clearly here, is actually a rather gruesome sight. This was the place over the gate where they displayed the heads of beheaded criminals, rather like they did in Japan. Pretty daunting prospect. You had to walk under those as you crossed the bridge. Of course, in Shakespeare's time, many people would have to come across here to visit the theatres on this side of the river, the South Bank, the ones who didn't use boats. This was particularly interesting because these many arches kind of partly blocked the water coming downstream, and so the water got very swirled through under the arches, became actually rather dangerous for boats trying to get upstream, and passengers would usually get off, walk and get on again. And many people died. In the 17th century, they said roughly 50 watermen a year died in the dangerous water. So this is a pretty wild area. Now let's have a look at the way it changed over the years. Let's look at the next picture. Here we are. Here's another view of the bridge. You can see the buildings quite nicely on there, and the heads again on the right, and a nice ship over there. Of course, the masted ships couldn't get past London Bridge. This was the limit for big ships. After that, just small ones could get through. Okay, let's go to the next one. Here we see lots of churches. This is a little bit later. This is 1710. The buildings, many of the buildings have been modernized, but still London very much a city of churches. Okay, now let's see the next one. 1745. Still we can see the arches there and the buildings on top. And then suddenly 1832. What happened is a new London Bridge was opened in 1831. For a few years, the houses had been taken off the top of London Bridge to make it wider, but eventually it was decided a new bridge was required. And there it is. Now, this is the one actually that is currently in America. When it was pulled down, here we see it again, 1837, it was transported to Arizona, and instead of which the new build, this is the one that's gone to Arizona, and you can see how crowded it was in Victorian days. Here we are in the 1890s. And as we said last week, gradually other bridges were built across the river from Victorian times. And there, a nice long view in Arizona. That's what it looks like. Unlikely place for it to go. Okay, and the next one. This is actually a pedestrian alcove which was part of the London Bridge now in America. And there we are again. You can see the arch is now much wider, making it much easier for traffic to get through, and also meant that the river didn't ice over so much. With the old London Bridge, the water got rather blocked behind it and actually froze quite often in the winter. Okay, and there we are, 2003, London Bridge. This is London Bridge now, very wide arches and no problem at all for small boats and ferries to go through. So that's London Bridge, nice little bit of history. And we're now going to go down to London Bridge Pier. Here's the bridge, and we're going to go on a little trip down the river. There in the distance, you can see Tower Bridge, and here we are on a boat. Let's have a look from the angle of the boats that people have done over the centuries. We swing around there. This is looking at the north bank towards St. Paul's direction. There is a nice view of the bridge from below. And we swing around now to the south bank, and we're going to go across to the pier over there on the other side, because right in front of us there, let's get a bit closer, is a very famous warship, which is now a museum. And this area here was called the Pool of London, where lots of fresh produce came up. All the fish were brought up to the markets up here, and the fresh vegetables. It used to be packed with sailing ships. Actually, the pool is the same as in the city Liverpool. It means just an area of water. And we're going to visit that ship. And here's the nearest pier, where the river buses all stop. So this is a very convenient place to get on and off the river ferries. Here we are, London Bridge Pier. And let's walk along the bank towards the ship. Now, this ship is called the HMS Belfast. It's permanently moored here. It was a 11,500 ton light cruiser in the Royal Navy. And if anyone's interested in Navy history or ships, this is a wonderful place to visit. It's part of the Imperial War Museum. It was built in 1936, involved in various activities during the Second World War, in the Arctic particularly. It actually headed towards the Pacific War, towards Japan in 1945, but the war ended before it arrived. It then took part in the Korean War and has been moored here since 1971. And it's a very popular place to visit. A full tour is normally available, which means all 9 decks. You can have a wonderful time if you like wandering around ships. Lots of interactive exhibits, lots of things for children to do as well. And the guns, now the guns are interesting. Here are the main guns. They're actually pointing at a motorway service station. If they fired today, they would hit a motorway service station, which is 18.5 kilometers away on the M1 motorway. Why is it pointing in that direction? Well, partly because this is the limit it could fire at 45-degree angle. You see, those guns are at 45 degrees, which is a very aesthetically pleasing angle to be at. And that's why, and it happens that they're aimed at a service station in that direction. On board, there's a nice cafe, there's a nice bar. Here we are going inside. HMS Belfast, life belts there. There's also an interesting, oh, here are the shells ready in the massive guns. There are some interesting souvenirs. You can buy nice little brass ship's bells, or you can actually buy some little half-gill rum cups. That was the Navy sailors' daily ration of rum in the old days. And they explain all this on board the ship. So please check out their website as well. So that's the HMS Belfast, a very interesting place to visit. And right across the water is one of the most important historical places in London, which is the Tower of London. So let's look at some of my pictures of that, shall we? The Tower of London has an amazing history. It goes way back. Oh, here is the Pool of London with lots of sailing ships in it, as the way it used to be in Victorian times. This is the way Dickens knew it. Not anymore. And this is the view of the Tower of London from the road, right in front of it. You can see the massive walls. I included this stamp on the textbook. This is the White Tower. This is the very first part of the Tower of London to be built. It was started by William the Conqueror in 1066. And some of the walls at the bottom here are 4.5 meters thick, a massive place. Here's a nice Victorian view engraving from the river, always focused on the White Tower in the middle of the castle. Here it is. This is a drawing in 1543. It's just before Shakespeare's time. You can see there, right in the front here, is what is called the Traitors' Gate. And this is where many people who were heading there to go to prison actually went in from the river. We'll see that in a few moments. So the Tower of London, it's been a palace. It was official royal residence up until James I. It has also been a fortress originally. It was a prison for many, many years. It also held the stock of arms and armor, and there's actually a museum of armor in there today you can visit, and also the home of the crown jewels. The Queen and King's jewels are in there, and that's they can also be seen. Here's a plan of the tower. This is again from the 1950 guide, and you can see the White Tower there in the middle. Over here on the left is the Green, and here is Traitors' Gate here. So we'll be going inside here in a few minutes, and then you see towers all the way around, and this moat here and going up to Tower Hill behind it. Very, very impressive place altogether. This is Henry VIII around the age of 16. Strange enough, he was in Birmingham. I can't imagine what Henry VIII was doing there, but sorry to pop this personal picture in. Actually, that costume which we used for the school play was actually from the Royal Shakespeare Company, so that was kind of a nice memory for me. And here are the Yeomen of the Guard, the well-known Beefeaters we're going to see in a minute. They're extremely interesting because they are officially the Royal Guard at the Tower. And this stamp is celebrating the operetta by Gilbert and Sullivan, called the Yeomen of the Guard, and you can see a picture of the White Tower in the background. The Beefeaters are traditional bodyguards, as I say. These ones actually at the Tower, they originally looked after prisoners. They were all former military men. There is actually one woman working there as a yeoman today, and they're supposed to guard the crown jewels, but in fact, their main business today is tourist guide. So if you go there, I'm sure you'll see some giving you very useful information. Why are they called Beefeaters? Well, that's not very clear. Some people say an Italian visitor commented that they seem to eat a lot of beef, actually, in their rations. Some people say it comes from the French word buffetier, which meant someone who is a keeper of the king's buffet, but actually nobody knows. The yeomen themselves like to say the real people who are the Beefeaters are the ravens, and the raven's a very important bird we'll see in a minute. This is the crown jewels, two of them, the St. Edward's crown on the left and the Imperial State crown on the right. And this is a very nice postcard of the Queen's or King's orb and the scepter, which is that long kind of rod. These were both made for King Charles II. And that scepter you can see on the bottom left there, this is the largest diamond of the stars of Africa. Very, very famous diamond, which came from South Africa and given to King Edward VII. So please visit the crown jewels if you get the chance. They also appear in the Sherlock, recent Sherlock television series, by the way. And here we have a Beefeater being a tourist guide, complaining about they had to retire early. And I also put this in the textbook for you about a rather sad case in 1995 where police dogs were brought in to check out the place before the Queen's VJ Day celebration, and one of the dogs kind of attacked one of the ravens. Now, why are the ravens at the Tower? Well, they've been residents since Charles II's time in the 17th century, and there is people believe that if ever the ravens leave the Tower, disaster will strike the nation. Ravens, you don't really get ravens in Japan. They're I think, Watari Garasu. A few of them in Shiritoko, I think. They're rather bigger than regular crows. Very intelligent, interesting birds. And the Beefeaters look after them. The birds can't actually fly away completely because they have their wings partly trimmed, but they can fly a bit and they wander around. And there's an official raven master looking after them. Here he is, one of them. You may like to know there are actually 7 ravens there currently, and their names I put in the textbook: Jubilee, Harris, Grip, Rocky, Erin, Poppy, and Melina. And they're great attractions to tourists, of course. And a very cute thing, during COVID, there is actually an interview with one of the ravens called Grip, and I've put that in the textbook. You can check out website. It's only about a minute long. It's very cute. One last thing about the Beefeaters is they have an evening ceremony every night called the Ceremony of the Keys, 10 o'clock. And this has been going since the time of Queen Mary in 1555. And 4 soldiers come out with the yeoman warder. And the yeoman warder is carrying the keys to the tower. This is the way the conversation always goes. The sentry says, "Halt! Who comes there?" And the chief says, "The keys." Sentry, "Whose keys?" Chief, "Queen Elizabeth's keys." Takes his hat off. "God preserve Queen Elizabeth." Everybody, "Amen." And the clock strikes, dong, 10. And a soldier plays the last post on a bugle. This is a ceremony locking up the tower every night, which has gone on non-stop ever since 1555. It was nearly stopped during the war when a bomb dropped next door. The yeoman was blown to the ground, but stood up again and continued the ceremony. So there we are. And what we're going to have next is a little bit of rhyming slang. Now, you may be familiar with no, I'm sorry, before we get to that, let's stop that and go our little tour of the tower. Right, here we are back on the satellite picture. There is the tower just across from HMS Belfast. I mentioned before the Traitor's Gate, and that's right in the middle of the picture there. We're just zooming in on it. This has always been a very famous place. Many people who went through the Traitor's Gate never came out again. Let's start there. Here it is. Of course, in the old days, it was a direct entrance from the river, but nowadays it's looks like this. So we can just swing around a bit, I think, here. There's Tower Bridge in the background, and this nice river walk in front of the tower. This is also an area from where they sometimes do gun salutes on special occasions. We can see the moat there, and just swinging around the front of the tower. I should say that many famous people have been imprisoned in the tower, and of course several people have lost their lives here over the centuries. Most famously, 2 of the queens of Henry VIII lost their lives here. Oh, here we are looking across to the Shard there, and swinging round into the entrance into the tower. And let's go inside, shall we? Here we are, the nice arches, and as we swing left, you can see the White Tower. There it is, the very first building constructed here, and then we're going to go up onto Tower Green. Looking at the map again, we can see Tower Green there on the left. Tower Green was where many of the executions of prisoners took place, including Anne Boleyn, Catherine Howard, Henry's 4 wives, and there are the official residence of the king or queen, this area here, these houses. Of course, they don't often stay there these days, but the official residence now being Buckingham Palace, but this is still an official residence of the king or queen. And swinging around there to the other main palace area. There we can see from above, and there we see several guards who probably the ones who do the ceremony of the keys, talking to the tourists. And if we now look around here, we can see, I think, one of the beefeaters actually in operation. Walking through, there he is. And remember, they look after the, oh, here is in this very Tudor uniform, going all the way back to Tudor times, with ER meaning Queen Elizabeth, Elizabeth Regina, written on his front, and a nice crown. And I think we have a nice picture of crows. Here we go. There they are, a lovely couple. These are, as it says there, Jubilee and Moonin. It says Jubilee was hatched in 2012. He was given to the Queen on her diamond Jubilee. There we are. A lovely couple. Okay, I'd like to show you one interesting thing. And this is very familiar gin called Beefeater. And you can see there, Beefeater in his kind of more formal gear. And what's interesting about Beefeater gin is that recently, I bought this recently, if you look very carefully, they're very kindly including a picture of the River Thames inside the bottle. And can you see there's Tower Bridge at the bottom, and then see up the river you can see various other bridges. Very nice idea to do that. On the back of the bottle it says, "London has always been a remarkable place. It's a city where nothing is impossible. It's a place where the world's best cultural ingredients come together and are distilled into something new." Very nicely written, applying to gin. So I hope you'll rush out and buy your nice Thames River version of Beefeater's gin. Okay, time to move on with our tour. What we're going to do next is go to Tower Bridge, which is just down the road. But before that, I'd like to show you something which is actually given to me by some years ago by a friend I was at university with, a lady who became the designer of the Tower Bridge Museum. And she kindly gave me this lovely little poster, which is actually basically written in Cockney slang. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with Cockneys. I mean, people who lived within the sound of the Bow Bells Church, the bells of Bow Bells in the East End of London. And of course, the East End of London has always been very, very busy, and not the most, some of the poorer people of London used to be in the East End. Rather, many cities are rather like that. The kind of Stamachi area and the Yamati area, very similar kind of idea. But Cockney had many of its own vocabulary. So let me explain what this poster is all about. And I'll have to go and look at the screen here. let me read it to you. So it's using a nice Cockney accent, a bit like, you know, David Beckham, you know, he speaks like this. Get off the Oxo Cube at Tower Hill and go down the Frog and Toad. Have a butcher's round the best bridge in the world, Tower Bridge. You'll love it. Would you like me to explain what it means? Well, this is what it means. Off means off. Oxo cubes are little cubes from which you can make a nice gravy. Last time on the tour, we went to the Oxo Tower, do you remember? On the way down the river. Well, cube rhymes with tube. So of course it means the underground railway. So let's go down go down the there we go, back here. Get off the Oxo Cube, so get off the tube and go down the Frog and Toad. Toad rhymes with road, okay? And then Ava butchers. Av means have, and butchers actually means look. Why does it mean look? Because the rhyme is from a butcher's hook from which you would hang meat. It's very complicated, eh? So have a butcher's means have a look. And of course, love at the end, you'll love it, spelt like that, just means, sorry, this is not look, this is a mistake I've made. It means love, right, love. Now, so this is Cockney rhyming slang. Some of the expressions are familiar to anybody. So, you know, I'm not from London, but I would grow up understanding things like have a butcher's, that means look. I would know that expression. And many people would know Frog and Toad means road. Oxo Cube might not know. Very interesting. There's hundreds of these examples, and it was a kind of secret language, a way for people to communicate with each other so that strangers couldn't understand very well. Kind of the local dialect. Anyway, very famous Cockney rhyming slang. I recommend taking a look at some more of that. There's lots of it on the internet. Okay, so let's carry on, shall we? I'll just stop my sharing here, and let's carry on with the tour. We're now going to the actual Tower Bridge. There it is. It's not very far to go. It's become a tremendous icon of London, of course. It's, as I said in the text, a very fine example of Victorian engineering. It was actually opened in 1894, towards the end of Victoria's reign. The reason was to relieve traffic congestion, because 30% of the population were actually living east of London Bridge, and they didn't all want to go and have to cross the river at London Bridge, so the Tower Bridge was needed. It's actually a steel frame construction with stone on the outside as kind of decoration. It's called a bascule bridge, and that means that it has, they call them leaves, two leaves that actually open up like this, like an ancient drawbridge, so that they could let ships through, especially ships with masts. And we're going to see that in action. Here we go. This used to be operated by steam. The average time taken to go up and down again was about with a nice siren. Now, in the old days, this used to open 50 times a day or more, which is an awful lot of time. Here it is, you see, a nice picture again, opened up so that a tall ship can come through. This was actually the time of the London Olympics. Right at the top, I think we can zoom in at the top, the London ring, the Olympic rings, which were displayed there before and during the Olympics, had to be actually folded up so that this ship could come through. A nice coat of arms there at the top. And at the top are the walkways. Now, the reason the walkways were there, of course, is that if the bridge kept opening regularly, people got jammed. So the idea was that if they had walkways across the top, pedestrians could go across, whether the bridge was open or closed. And now it's a museum and includes access to the walkway. So let's have a look at that. Here's the bridge down on the road level. You can see it's a very splendid construction. The road actually goes through these wonderful towers. And there are two walkways up above. They give, of course, wonderful views up and down the river. In fact, a very unusual view. And here we are up in one of the walkways. And we can swing around. There you see what it's like inside. And you can just see the Shard in the distance. And the museum actually is in both towers, and you can walk across the walkways as you go through. And here's just a glimpse of part of the tower. It includes quite a lot of the old machinery, various Victorian objects, and lots of explanation of how they actually operated this extraordinary mechanism, steam mechanism in the old days. Actually, the bridge doesn't open very much these days. There's not much demand for ships to go through because there's nowhere much to go. Because once you get to London Bridge, big ships can't go any further. So just occasionally it's open. So you'll be really lucky if you happen to see it opening. Okay, so let's now move on. There's a nice view of Tower Bridge from the tower. And we're going to move on now down the river to a very interesting part of London, which has been completely changed in recent years. So when we zoom back, we get some idea of the River Thames. There it is. Goes like this, goes down towards the sea, and we come to this huge U-bend. And this U-bend is actually called traditionally the Isle of Dogs. And it used to be a very important part of the port of London. And this whole area is now called Canary Wharf, because all the docks were closed by about 1980. The reason is that containerization kind of took over, and downstream from here towards the sea are many deep water port facilities which have taken over the main port operations. And of course, huge boats couldn't come all the way up here anyway. So the docks have been revitalized and very much changed into both business areas and residential areas. Very, very interesting indeed. Isle of Dogs, why is it called the Isle of Dogs? Well, that's not very clear. Some people think it's because of Henry VIII's greyhounds were kept here. Some people think it may mean ducks rather than dogs. Actually, nobody knows. And Canary Wharf, as you can see the name there, is interesting. This is nothing to do with birds, actually, birds living here. This is because the Canary Islands trade was centered here. And Canarias actually was a Spanish word meaning dogs as well. So we have a lot of dog references in this particular area. So, shall we have a look at the? Let's go to some Canary Wharf pictures here. This is, as I was saying, the docks. On the left there, you can see the pool just here. So as we go down the river, in this old 1950 map, you can see all the dock area here on the south bank, and then the Isle of Dogs here with the very famous West India dock and the South Dock, Millwall Dock. And this area here has now been completely modernized as Canary Wharf. This is a street map showing the River Thames here, coming all the way around, and Canary Wharf development area here. Let's go a little bit closer. Here we have Canada Square, Canada Place, which is where they have this huge building we're going to see in a moment. This area now is become central London's second big financial area. It's full of offices and lots and lots of development of still going on, lots and lots of construction. This is basically since the 1990s. Canada Tower, which is a 250-meter high building, was built in 1991. And since then, construction has gone on. And it's actually a very pleasant place to visit, very interesting if you like modern parts of cities combined with lots of history. There is an old boat that's moored there, and buildings like this. And here's construction going on. This is when I went to London 2 years ago. One of the problems is these buildings have been constructed recently, and of course with COVID, as I mentioned, I think last time, now lots of offices, people are not actually working here because they're now working from home. So, and lots of the residential places which are being built in this area, no one is quite sure whether they're going to be able to survive or not. Now, when we were there 2 years ago, very, very bustling area. There are lots of bars and lovely beside the water. It's also it's a very safe area. Lots of people want to live there. Here are some hotels. There's a new Novotel over there. And here is one of the old East End pubs, the North Pole, which is, and this is the hotel I actually stayed at, the Metropolitan, which is kind of not a particularly new hotel, very interesting place. And you can see now it's pretty clean water. This is a great crested grebe, which is obviously needs fish, so there must be lots of fish there to feed on. So it's and inside some wonderful shops, and of course to cater for all the business people, lots and lots of restaurants, and excellent shopping area actually. Even this is a water refill station where you can refill your water bottles, and I was amused to find lots of sushi. It says eat beautiful. These days British people eat a lot of sushi, and it's rather taken over from sandwiches for lunches, and this is in a kind of deli that's used by a lot of business people, and you can see here the sushi packs with interesting names like Sumo Light, and it tells you only 685 calories. Actually not particularly cheap. I mean, that's £10, which is about, what, 1,300 yen. Anyway, outside some nice bars on the water. You can sit outside, and very nice at night. Here we are. The question is what's going to happen in the future, so we don't know. But if you're interested in modern developments and definitely recommend it. And you can see there are people doing their best to add some greenery as well. And there in the background is one of the local trains we're going to see in a moment. And over here we can see some kids enjoying special boating lessons. So that's a very new dock area called Canary Wharf. And here is our next little interesting journey on the light railway, the Docklands Light Railway, which now runs all the way through this area. And it also goes to London City Airport. London City Airport is a very small airport, just 3 miles away from here, but very popular these days. It had nearly 5 million passengers a couple of years ago. They even have flights to New York. And of course, very easy for flights to Europe. I've flown to Italy from here. Very, very convenient. Not a particularly wonderful airport as such, because it's very small, but very good for both business travel and tourist travel. So, and there's also, I should say, the Museum of London Docklands is also in this area, and that's full of the history of the dock areas. That's well worth a visit. Okay, time for a train, I think. Right, the Docklands Light Railway has been here since the 1980s, gradually extending further and further. Quite a big network now. You can see there the blue lines. And we're going to go from Heron Quays station right in the middle of Canary Wharf. These trains are very pleasant to travel on. It's a bit like being on a monorail, actually. There's no driver. It's all automatic. And so we go for a little ride from Heron Quays going south. You can see there is some greenery over there as well. And now let's go to the front of the train. Now we've come down the Isle of Dogs and come to the bottom of this, looks like a kind of peninsula rather than an island. And we zoom in there, and it's actually called Island Gardens. And we're going to get off the train and we're going to walk just a little bit now, because we're across the river from our next destination, which is Greenwich. Pronounced Greenwich, not Greenwich, but Greenwich. And there's the river, you see. And in fact, there is a tunnel under, a pedestrian tunnel under the river, which runs like that. And let's walk from the station to the tunnel entrance. There we are. There's the station exit. And you can see on the map there as well. And just a few minutes walk. It's quite a residential area here. And coming up just along here is the entrance to the Greenwich Foot Tunnel. There it is. This was built in 1902, and it was built actually with a particular reason, was for workers who lived on the south side, dock workers, to be able to get to work in the docks on the north side of the river without having to cross the river by ship or boat. And this is the rather splendid Victorian, well, right at the end of Victorian period tunnel. And it's 365 meters long, and there are the stairs down, and it's kind of tile glazed originally, and it's actually a very easy way to get across the river to Greenwich. So I think we should just go through there, and we come up on the other side. This is actually at Greenwich. So I think it's time now to have a look at, just introduce Greenwich for you, shall we? And let's have a look at some pictures. Greenwich is really a very attractive and very interesting part of London. And it's been popular and famous for a long time. This is a picture by Canaletto, the famous artist, 1751. And it's looking from where we started our little tunnel journey on the other side of the river, looking south to Greenwich. And what we can see there is those massive buildings, partly designed by Sir Christopher Wren, the same as St. Paul's Cathedral. They used to be the Royal Hospital for Seamen, and then later became the Royal Naval College, and includes some very famous naval-related exhibits you can visit, such as the Painted Hall, which is very spectacular. And there, right in the middle, I think you can see there, in the distance, is actually called the Queen's House. We'll be visiting in a moment. And then way up there on the top of the hill, at the back there, is the Royal Observatory. We'll also be visiting. And I included in the textbook nice lines from Samuel Johnson. He lived in Greenwich for a while when he moved to London. And in 1738, so a little bit before this picture, he wrote, "On Thames's bank in silent thought we stood, where Greenwich smiles upon the silver flood, struck with the seat that gave Eliza birth, we kneel and kiss the consecrated earth." And Eliza, of course, means Queen Elizabeth. And he mentioned Queen Elizabeth because she actually was born right there on the other side of the river. Let's move on to the next picture here, which is looking back in the opposite direction. So this is from the Greenwich side of the river, looking back towards Canary Wharf, and there right in the middle, that's the big Canada building there, which has been there since the 1990s, and you can see lots of construction going on. And there's a nice sightseeing ferry on the river. And here is the map which I included in the text we saw earlier on, just to show where we are. There's the foot tunnel from Island Gardens, and we're going to go across this way. And it says here, Greenwich is just 4 miles downstream from Tower Bridge and served by river cruises from lots of different piers, and also by regular trains. Also regular trains come to Greenwich. This is the actual railway line from Charing Cross Station near Westminster, see? Waterloo, London Bridge, Greenwich. So we came on the actually Docklands line this way, but there is actually the regular British Rail service as well. So not difficult to get to Greenwich at all. And this is a very useful aerial picture from the actual official guide to Greenwich. Here in the foreground, you can see the massive park area, and the observatory is actually this area here, which is actually up on top of the hill, and the planetarium right there. And then where we came across is right here. We came across, there's Canary Wharf in the distance. We came down here by the railway and then under the tunnel through here. And the Cutty Sark. Sorry, let's go back on. There you can actually see a cruise ship. Cruise ships do come up to this part of the river. There is a good berth for them just here, just up the river from Greenwich. Quite a reasonably sized ship, actually. We'll see another one later on. Right up here, top left, is Tower Bridge. So here, the river has come down here, and then it carries on this way. And in fact, there, over on the right here, is the famous O2 building, which was built for the millennium, which is now a huge event space. And going further down the river towards the sea, this is a picture actually taken from a plane going to the airport. You can see this is further down the river, lots of residential developments there as well. And nearer the estuary, there is a very important Thames flood barrier, which is shown here on a stamp, 1983 stamp. This was a kind of dam construction, which is to control the water at high tide or to prevent flooding of London. Like most cities located on rivers, it's highly liable to flooding if the water is not controlled. And they decided to put in this Thames barrier, which can open up, close down, depending on the situation. And that's basically protecting London. And here is a nice postcard showing the main attractions of Greenwich. So we have, that's actually Nelson, the famous Admiral Nelson's hat, which is in the museum. This is the observatory. Here is the Cutty Sark ship we'll be visiting, and the clock from the observatory, and so on. These are kind of the important sightseeing and historical sites of Greenwich. The actual name Greenwich means green harbour. Which, the Old English word which actually means harbour. There are various cities in Britain with that name, Ipswich, Norwich, for example, which are port towns. And Greenwich is now a royal borough of London. It's part of London, and it's since 2012, the Diamond Jubilee of the Queen, it's become a royal borough, but it's always had royal connections. So it's been associated with royalty and with the sea and navigation ever since the Romans came here 2,000 years ago, and it's now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, Maritime Greenwich. So the north bank of the river has traditionally been rather poor, and the south bank very aristocratic and royal and flourishing, and impressive buildings, many of which still remain. So when visitors used to come from Europe, for example, they would come up the river, and when they came round the bend, suddenly there in front of them would be Greenwich, and Henry VIII's palace was there. He was born there, actually, in the palace, which his father had rebuilt, which was called the Palace of Placentia. And Placentia means pleasant, and it was a very famous palace. Henry VIII was born there, Queen Elizabeth I was born there, Queen Mary was born there, and Queen Henry VIII made it a very popular place for lots of parties, and, jousting, and lots of things like that, even a deer park. So a very, very historic, important part of London from way back. And it also became very popular when steam launches were introduced to the river in the 19th century, in the 1830s, and also steam trains. So people used to flock here at the weekends. A very popular place for eating white bait. White bait, the fish white bait, which in Japanese is shira uo. In Dickens' time, people used to come here, especially to eat that. Later, the river got rather polluted, so that kind of faded away. But that was a big attraction at the time. But the town centre now has some elegant 18th and 19th century buildings, many elegant buildings left. So it's a very pleasant place to visit. So shall we have a little walk in the town now? We're going to start here by the exit we've just come across, right? And here is the exit of the tunnel. So this is where we're going to walk from. There on the right is the Cutty Sark, the famous ship. We'll visit a little bit later. And there we go. There it is. This is actually the museum around the ship. Greenwich is also, of course, a market town from long ago. It used to have a lot of fresh produce in the central market, but now the central market had a roof added in 1908 and lots of craft stalls and fashion and jewelry and antique stalls and the weekend markets and so on. A very nice place for people who like markets. And there's also a fan museum even for the world's fans, including Japanese, of course. And they have fan making lessons and so on. Now, this is where we're going to stop for lunch. Goddard's at Greenwich. This is one of my favorite places, a good place to stop in for a pie. This is a restaurant that's been there since 1890, as it says on over the door. And what it used to specialize in is an East End specialty, pie and mash with liquor and eels. Now, what does that mean? Well, first of all, there used to be eel pies. Eels were caught in the river, not so much these days. They were spiced and they were stewed and they're made into pies. And then nowadays it's mostly minced meat, beef pies or vegetable pies. So that you had pies and you had mashed potatoes and what they call liquor. So it says pie and mash with liquor or gravy. What they mean by liquor is actually a kind of parsley sauce. It's not alcoholic at all. It used to be made with water from the eels, cooking the eels. And they have, as you can see there, minced beef pie, vegetable pie, cheddar cheese and onion pie, and veggie pie, lots of different types of pie, highly recommended. And you also have lots of nice desserts. Oh, here we go, pie. You can see the green parsley sauce and peas and mashed potatoes. And on the left, it looks like a bottle of London Pride beer as well. Excellent if you're a pie lover. This is a very, very traditional kind of East London food. And nice desserts too, like crumble. This is crumble with ice cream, all highly recommended. It's a very traditional kind of place, family run, and it's a very convenient place. So please stop off there whenever you fancy a pie. Okay, let's carry on up the road. And we're now heading towards the museum area. The Royal Museums of Greenwich are extremely famous. There are 4 of them in all. There's the National Maritime Museum, the Queen's House, the Royal Observatory, and the Cutty Sark. So we're going to start with the National Maritime Museum, which I showed in the Canaletto picture. Those old buildings designed by Christopher Wren are now actually used by the University of Greenwich, which has just been around for a few years. The National Maritime Museum, we have to turn left here when we get to the park, is a huge museum. It has a massive collection, around 2.5 million items. And they're all materials related to Britain's maritime history. As I said in the text, 4,000 paintings, maps, manuscripts, official records, photos, ship plans, navigational instruments, uniforms like Nelson's final uniform, and lots of things, as well as exhibitions on modern issues such as global warming. So should we go inside? On the left, you can see some figureheads from ships there. And here, lovely global map. This is very impressive. The 7 seas of the world. And there are also lots of very interesting ship models on display. Here we are, all through the history of world maritime history, not just British history. Great stuff. We'll be seeing one of those ships very shortly. Altogether, a very exciting place to visit if you're interested in the sea and history and so on. Now, if we walk along a little way, we come to a very interesting house, a very beautiful house called the Queen's House. This is the only remaining part of the old palace area, the palace building. This is older. It goes back to 1616, in fact, some of it was built. 1616 was the year that Shakespeare died. So we're back in the early 17th century. And it was built originally for Anne of Denmark, who was King James I's queen. And then it was completed by Charles I's wife. So very much connected with queens. Look how beautiful this is. It's actually built over a road originally. The road has actually been moved now, but there was actually a road underneath it. It was designed by the famous Inigo Jones, the first classical style building in England, and it includes this wonderful tulip spiral staircase. It's named after the tulip design on the staircase. Very, very famous staircase. It was based on Jones's trips to Italy, and you can see on display are the lots of paintings from the National Maritime Museum, lots of portraits, fantastic ceiling there, and here's a lovely picture of Queen Elizabeth I in all her glory. And this is a place she knew very well, Greenwich, not this building, because this building was after her, but she was very fond of Greenwich. Okay, so that is the Queen's House, a very lovely place to visit. And it's right on the edge of the park. And those other buildings nearer the river were actually built so that the Queen's House could keep a view of the Thames and can be seen from the Thames. And it has these lovely corridors. And let's go outside into the park. Now, the Greenwich Park was the first of London's royal parks, and it was laid out by King Charles II, who had a lot to do with Greenwich, and included a deer reserve. And Dickens mentioned the fact that in the mid-19th century, Easter fairs were held here, where couples would come rolling down the hill. This was a very popular, dangerous pastime of couples rolling down the hill together. A very interesting thing to do at a weekend. Anyway, the important thing about this park is that up the hill was the Royal Observatory, and this was founded by Charles II in 1675 for astronomical study. And the idea was to try and improve navigation for all Britain's ships as Britain became a major shipping nation. It was important to map the stars to help sailors know where they actually were when they traveled the oceans. If you remember Drake's ship, the Golden Hind, we saw last time, poor old Drake, he knew always where his latitude was, but he couldn't be too sure of his longitude, because longitude is to do with time. And the important thing was to try and find a way to know not only the time of the place you were at, which is easy to work out from the sun, but the time of the place back home, or some place you could use as a reference so that you knew how far east or west you were of that place. And lots of people, including Galileo and Newton, were interested in this problem, which had worried the world for centuries, because ships kept getting lost and crashing into rocks when they thought they were in some other place. And this is the place that the research went on to try and find a solution to this longitude problem. And here we've come up the hill, and here is the observatory, and in front of the observatory is the meridian line. And this is the line that divides the two hemispheres, west on one side, east on the other. And since 1884, Greenwich has been the place where the prime meridian has been fixed. And there it is. You can have 1 foot in the Western hemisphere and 1 foot on the Eastern hemisphere. This is actually called Flamsteed House, also designed by Christopher Wren in 1675 when the observatory was opened. And it was the residence of the royal astronomers who looked at the stars and mapped the stars and tried to help. And one of the astronomers was actually Halley of comet fame. And it was the 7th astronomer royal, Sir George Airy, who actually defined 0 degrees longitude as being here. And Greenwich Mean Time could be transmitted using the new electric telegraph. So let's have a look at a few of my own pictures of here, shall we? So here we go from the park. Very beautiful place. And there is an important feature. This is the time ball. This was, since 1833, this is used to show the time to ships out on the river. They could see it very clearly because it's right on the top of the hill. And at exactly 1 o'clock, the red ball drops, and it still does it today. At 5 to 1, the ball gradually goes up, it waits a little bit, and then goes to the top and drops at exactly 1 o'clock. And this current ball is actually 101 years old. Here are people practicing this rolling down the hill together, a fun-filled 19th century, 18th century habit. Nice grey squirrel in the park. And here is a close-up of the red ball, the time ball, to show the exact time so that sailors could set their clocks by it. Here are some stamps showing Halley's comet, and this wonderful man, John Harrison, who the lone genius who solved the greatest scientific problem of his time, it says. And he actually spent 30, 40 years of his life trying to find the solution. And his solution in the end was, as you can see there over here, he is holding his clock, because he made actually from these machines, which could go to sea and travel the world, although the ship was tossing around, whatever the temperature and so on, they could always show the time back, in this case, in Greenwich, so that you always knew exactly what the time was here, and you knew what the time was in the place you were at, and from that you could tell actually where you were in the world. Very, very important. And this is a rather nice book showing that. And here's his wonderful timekeeper number 4, very beautiful watches also appearing on stamps. And here the regular, showing the measurements, British yard, 2 feet to 1 foot. And here, different, there we see Nagasaki, Japan. And it says here, Tokyo, 139 degrees east. So all the longitude, there's the prime meridian line, the red line. Here it is on different stamps going across the world. So Greenwich is, of course, very important, the prime meridian of the world. And here's a t-shirt I bought showing that, which is rather nice. Here lots of people standing on the line, standing across the line, doing somersaults on the line. There was also some kissing on the line, but I won't show those pictures. And here's a nice view from the top of the hill, looking down to the Queen's house, just down there. And there is Canary Wharf in the background. Okay. So let's go back down the hill. Hiro, could we just have just a brief break while we go to the loo? Edith can.
Hi, okay.
Okay. Just 2 minutes.
Hi.順調.
Hello, I'm back.
So we resume from here.
Yeah.
Just to finish PowerPoint and come back to the Google.
Right. Okay. So now let's go back down the hill and check the final museum, the Cutty Sark. So there we are, back down by the tunnel entrance. Okay, now this wonderful ship, which has been here for some time now. Let's have a little visit to this museum. The last of the tea clippers. And here it is, a lovely picture of the Cutty Sark, which one of the most beautiful sailing vessels ever. And this was part of the wonderful tea races, which went on in the 19th century. The idea was to get tea back from China as quickly as possible. The history of tea is very interesting because it originally came to Britain in the 1650s, but was heavily taxed and at first, which meant a lot of illegal tea started coming in from Europe. And the East India Company, which was in charge of a lot of the tea, didn't like this. They were losing business. So the government suddenly slashed the duty and tea became a very popular necessity rather than just a luxury item. That meant there was a huge demand. And so these amazing ships would go to China, pick up their tea, and they would race back. Now, it's a bit strange because, as you know, tea has a long shelf life, 3 years or so. There's no hurry to get tea, actually, but what they wanted is the freshest first tea from China, rather like Beaujolais Nouveau or the first fish of the year. And so this was one of the ships that was actually involved in these tea races from China. And it was a long journey in those days, of course. This is before steam. This is by sail only. And these ships were called clippers, which meant they traveled very fast at a good clip. And they were very long, narrow ships designed for speed and as many sails as possible. The Cutty Sark was actually built a little bit late. It was built in 1869, the same year that the Suez Canal was opened. And it was very successful in going to China. It could manage the journey just about as fast as any other ship. But they had an immediate problem because of the Suez Canal and also because of steamships, because steamships could use the Suez Canal where sailing ships couldn't because there was no wind pushing them through the canal. This meant that steamships gradually took over the tea trade, and that was a huge problem. So anyway, here we have what the museum looks like today. On the left, there we have another Australian stamp of the Cutty Sark. And here's a cutting from 2005, talking about government emergency grant was given to try and refurbish the Cutty Sark completely. And you can go on board, and it's a wonderful trip, actually. It had lots of demonstrations. For example, this shows how all the tea chests were loaded on board, and there's an extraordinary amount of tea that could be held. As I said in the textbook, the full cargo was 10,000 tea chests, and that actually could make 200 million cups of tea. So this was quite a lot for one ship to carry. Most of it was black tea, but there was also some gunpowder tea, lapsang souchong, and so on, a variety of tea. But the journey took about 110 days on average. So that meant that a ship was away for maybe 7 or 8 months on one journey. And just 27 or between 27 and 35 men in the crew of each ship. And the Cutty Sark itself, if you go on board now, there's this wonderful man who claims to be the captain, Captain Wuchet, who was actually on 10 voyages from 1885, and this wonderful guide says, I am the Captain Woodgett, and tells you everything about the life he experienced back in the 1880s. It's very, very entertaining, very interesting. It was the Captain Woodgett actually kept a monkey on board and bred dogs and took photographs like the photograph we see here on the left. That's actually his photograph he took in around 1885. Well worth a visit just to hear his talk. The museum also includes lots of interesting videos. Here you see various things inside, very British, of course. It was built in Scotland. There's a nice place where you can hang your drink bottles. And on the right, we have heads. The toilets are called heads. As ships tended to be called heads. In fact, the Mikasa in Yokosuka also has heads, because Togo, of course, was trained in Britain, and that ship also was made in Britain. So the word head, they're called heads, toilets on ships, because they used to be right at the front, the head of the ship. And the reason was that the toilet would get washed out by the waves at the front. Very simple idea. And when we were there, they were actually, it says traditional riggers. There's a tremendous amount of rigging on, you can imagine, on the ropes on the sails, and there were actually men there who regularly have to repair, sort out all the rigs, and there they are working. So here we are. This is an East Indiaman ship on a stamp. The Cutty Sark, the latest, when it was turned into a museum just a few years ago, and which was reopened in 2012, they actually lifted the whole ship 3 meters. So you can actually go underneath the ship, under all that. And there's a cafe and display area underneath the ship. It's like suspended in the air. It's fantastic, very dramatic. Now, the Cutty Sark is actually a famous name of a whiskey. Why is it a whiskey? Well, in 1923, when they wanted to introduce a new whiskey to the American market, they had a little meeting, and a famous Scottish artist said, well, you know, the Cutty Sark is going to be brought back to Portugal from soon. It was kind of in the news, and they decided to use the name. And he immediately drew a picture of the Cutty Sark on his napkin somewhere, and there it was. And that's been, I'll show you a real bottle in a minute. And here, also under the ship, all these wonderful figureheads. It was a private collection of these, with the figureheads that were on the front of ships, right on the front of the ship, as a kind of good luck token. Sometimes, many of them are women, but also they had famous politicians, even Florence Nightingale, one of these. Now, the big question is, why is it called a Cutty Sark? Well, the Cutty Sark is actually appears in a poem by the famous Robert Burns, the Scottish poet. And he's the one who wrote Auld Lang Syne. And in his poem called Tam O'Shanter, he mentioned, as I put in the textbook, the Cutty Sark. And here are the lines, and I'll just read them in with original Scottish pronunciation. Cutty Sark o Paisley Harn, while a lassie she had worn, in longitude does scorely scanty, was her best and she was vanty. And the story goes that Tam O'Shanter was a heavy drinker. And one night he went drinking and he went out with his horse called Meg. And on the way back, very drunk, he happened to pass a church. And there, inside the church, was a wild party going on of witches. And the devil was there, playing the bagpipes. And there were all these witches dancing around, and in the middle was one very young, beautiful girl, witch. And all she was dressed in was a cutty sark, and a cutty sark was a very short petticoat. And Tam O'Shanter, looking through the window, was so impressed by her, he suddenly said, "Oh, well done, cutty sark." The party stopped. Silence. They all looked at him, and suddenly the chase was on. And they chased him, and they chased him, and on his horse, and there at the back is this one, Maggie was her name, the girl in the cutty sark. And Tam did his best to escape her clutches, and his horse Meg ran on, because they knew that witches could not cross water. So they came to a stream, and the horse leapt across the water and escaped. But Maggie had hold of poor Meg's tail, and it came off in her hand. And so there she is, the witch with the horse's tail on the front of the cutty sark. There she is. It's a pretty amazing story. Anyway, that's the story of the cutty sark. Why did the owner decide to use the name cutty sark if you know she couldn't cross water? Why a strange choice for a ship? But anyway, we'll never know. He never explained why he chose it. But that's the cutty sark, well worth a visit. Please try that. Anyway, we're nearly at the end of our tour, so I think we should now head back very quickly upriver. So if Hiro could just show us where we are again, the whole journey. We're going to go all the way back up the river. So we're here to start with, and we're going to go all the way. Going to get on one of the fast ferries, which are now run by Uber. The Uber ferries, which are kind of jet catamarans, and go all the way up past Canary Wharf, and then round the bend at the top, and then we go up round the next bend to under Tower Bridge, and we carry on past London Bridge, and we're going to end up in Westminster, where we began last week. There we go. Okay. So let's do a quick return journey, shall we? Here we go. So there's the cutty sark in the evening. There's the nice sunset. There's the exit from the tunnel. There is actually a cruise ship going past, and the sun's setting up to the west. And there we can see Canary Wharf in the distance. This is down at the pier, and actually another sailing vessel there. And here we go up the river at high speed on our jet catamaran. There's a Shard on the left, and Tower Bridge ahead of us. And here's one of the amazing boats. They're very, very fast, very exciting. I recommend standing at the back here. Fantastic views. They go zipping along the river. And here's a female staff member throwing the rope out on the river bus. And here we are. How about this? Tower Bridge at night, beautifully lit up, and you can see the water swirling by at high speed. And here we go up past the Shakespeare's Globe and past the towers to the London Eye, where we were last week, and the icons of London, the taxi, the London Eye, the red telephone boxes, and there's County Hall, all lit up at night by Westminster Bridge, and lots of wonderful London souvenirs to take home with us. And that's it, folks. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed that.
はい、お疲れ様でした。
So we were a bit over again, right?
I didn't measure the time. So when did we start?
I think it was about 2:30, wasn't
2:30? Oh, then we stopped for a while. So it must be 1 hour and
it?
45 minutes, maybe.
Yeah.